Long before the laughter filled the living room, there was fear. It was the kind of fear that makes the heart beat fast, the kind that makes a boy imagine punishment before it even arrives. The slippers sat on the corner of the veranda, wet and ruined. Their once shiny brown straps now bent and peeling. To anyone else, they were just a pair of old slippers. But to Brian, a 16-year-old secondary school boy, they were a symbol of his father's authority. He knew one thing for certain. Those slippers were never meant to leave the house, and yet he had borrowed them. It had started so simply. Brian had rushed outside to chase a small football his friends had kicked over the fence. His own rubber sandals were missing, so without thinking, he slipped his feet into his father's slippers. They were too big, almost swallowing his feet, but they served the moment. The trouble began when he stepped into the rain-soaked yard. The mud clung to the soles, the straps loosened, and before he could reach the ball, one slipper had twisted awkwardly. Brian bent down to fix it, but the strap tore slightly at the side. He froze. His heart pounded. He whispered to himself, "What will Baba see?" The memory of his father's stern warnings filled his mind. Baba was a quiet man, respected in the neighborhood, the kind of father who never spoke too much, but whose silence could be louder than any shouting. Brian carried the ruined slippers back inside, wiping them furiously with an old cloth. But no matter how hard he tried, the damage was clear. The rain had spoilt them, and his clumsy feet had sealed their fate. That night, Brian could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, imagining all kinds of punishment. What he didn't know was that the truth would not bring anger. Instead, it would bring laughter, a story, and a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The next morning, the house smelled of warm tea and fresh mandazi. The sound of chickens clucking in the yard blended with the soft hum of the radio playing gospel songs. Brian sat at the table, but his appetite was gone. His eyes kept drifting toward the veranda, where the slippers were hidden under a rag. Every bite of mandazi felt heavy, and every glance at his father's calm face reminded him of what was waiting. Baba sat at the head of the table, sipping his tea slowly. His broad shoulders and deep-set eyes gave him an air of quiet authority. He was not a man who needed to raise his voice. A single look was often enough to make his children straighten up. Brian felt that look might come at any moment, sharp as a blade, when Baba discovered the truth about the slippers. His younger sister, Amina, noticed his silence. "Why are you so quiet today?" she asked, chewing happily. Brian forced a smile and shook his head. "I'm just thinking," he replied, but his voice cracked slightly. Amina shrugged and went back to her food, but Mama's eyes lingered on him. She was the type of mother who could read her children's moods without a word being spoken. After breakfast, Brian tried to sneak out of the house. He thought if he stayed outside long enough, maybe the problem would vanish. Maybe Baba wouldn't notice. But guilt followed him like a shadow. He found himself sitting under the mango tree, staring at the ruined slippers in his mind. The weight of the secret grew heavier by the minute. What Brian didn't know was that his father had already seen the slippers the night before. The wet mud had left marks on the floor, and Baba,
A man who noticed the smallest details had quietly followed the trail. He hadn't said a word, not yet, but soon the truth would come out. And with it, a surprising story Brian never expected to hear. By afternoon, the clouds gathered again, threatening more rain. Brian sat in the yard pretending to read his school notes, but his mind was far away. Every time the wind rustled through the trees, he thought of his father stepping onto the veranda, lifting the rag, and seeing what lay beneath. His stomach twisted. The sound came suddenly, a deep voice calling from the veranda, "Brian." Baba's tone was calm, but it carried weight. Brian dropped his notebook and hurried over. His father stood tall, his hands behind his back, and at his feet lay the slippers, no longer hidden. The torn strap and the dried mud told the whole story. Brian's throat dried. "Whose slippers are these?" Baba asked. The question was unnecessary, but it pressed like a hammer. Brian swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the ground. "They are yours, Baba," he admitted softly. Silence followed. Even the chickens seemed to pause their clucking. Brian braced himself, waiting for the anger, the lecture, maybe even punishment.
Instead, his father's lips curved into a smile. Then came something even more shocking, a laugh. A deep, hearty laugh that filled the air and echoed off the walls. Brian blinked, confused. Had he misheard? His father was laughing, not shouting. The sound felt strange, almost unreal. "You remind me of myself," Baba said finally, bending down to pick up the slippers. His eyes softened. "When I was your age, I spoiled my father's sandals in the exact same way. Rain, mud, and a foolish rush outside." He chuckled again, shaking his head at the memory. Brian stood frozen, unsure whether to smile or stay silent. His heart, which had been heavy with fear, now felt light but confused. How could his father laugh at something so serious? He didn't yet know that this was the beginning of a lesson, one that would teach him more about love than punishment ever could. Baba carried the slippers into the living room and sat on the old wooden chair near the window. The late afternoon sun painted his face in a soft glow, and for the first time that day, Brian saw not just a strict father, but a man with stories hidden deep inside him. He motioned for Brian to sit close. Amina and Mama soon joined, curious about the laughter they had overheard. "When I was a boy," Baba began, his voice calm and steady, "my father had one pair of leather sandals. They were his pride. He wore them only to church or when visitors came. One rainy afternoon, I borrowed them without asking. I thought I would return quickly, but I slipped in the mud. The strap tore and the leather bent. I thought my life had ended that day." Brian leaned forward, his eyes wide. It was strange to imagine his father as a boy, trembling the same way he had trembled just hours ago. "What did your father do?" he asked carefully. Baba chuckled. He looked at me, at the broken sandals, and then at my frightened face. For a moment, I thought he would beat me, but instead, he laughed. He told me he had done the same thing to his own father's shoes.
He said mistakes are like shadows. Every child carries them as they grow. Mama's lips curved into a gentle smile and Amina giggled. But Brian sat in awe. The fear that had haunted him since yesterday now seemed foolish, almost laughable. His father wasn't angry. Instead, he was teaching him something deeper, something that stretched back through generations. For the first time, Brian realized that love didn't always come with sternness. Sometimes it came with a story, a laugh, and the reminder that mistakes are part of becoming who you are meant to be. The living room grew quiet after Baba's words. The radio in the corner hummed faintly, and the sound of distant rain tapping on the iron roof filled the silence. Brian sat still, his heart no longer racing with fear, but now swelling with something else: relief, respect, and a strange kind of joy. Baba leaned back in his chair and studied his children. "Do you know why I laughed when I saw the slippers?" Amina shook her head quickly, but Brian kept his eyes fixed on the floor. "It's because life is too short to let anger rule everything. Slippers can be repaired. Even sandals can be replaced. But the bond between a father and his children should never be broken by something so small."
His voice grew softer, almost like a whisper of wisdom carried by the rain. "If my father had beaten me that day, maybe I would have grown to fear him instead of love him. But his laughter taught me that mistakes are not the end. They are lessons. And today, I wanted you to learn the same." Brian finally lifted his head. His father's words sank deep into his heart, deeper than any lecture could. He realized that the slippers were not just slippers. They were a test of honesty, a chance for love to shine brighter than anger. Mama nodded in agreement, her eyes warm with pride, while Amina clapped her small hands and laughed as if she understood too. At that moment, Brian made a silent promise to himself. He would remember this lesson, not just for today, but for the future. One day, when he became a father, he would choose love over anger too. The night carried a gentle peace after the storm of fear and confession. Brian sat on his bed, staring at a patched slippers Baba had left near the door. The torn strap had been stitched roughly with thread. Not perfect, but enough to hold them together. It was a quiet reminder that not everything broken needs to be thrown away. Some things can be mended, just like trust. As he lay under his thin blanket, Brian thought about the way his father had laughed instead of shouted. That sound still echoed in his ears, warmer than any comfort he had ever known. It was shocking to him that something he expected to bring punishment had instead brought closeness. He realized that sometimes the fear of punishment is heavier than the mistake itself. The next morning, when Baba saw him in the yard feeding the chickens, Brian walked up to him with unusual boldness. "I'm sorry for spoiling your slippers," he said firmly, looking his father in the eyes. Baba placed a hand on his shoulder and nodded. "And I am proud of you for admitting it. Always remember, son, hiding mistakes only makes them heavier. But when you share them, you give others a chance to guide you." Those words settled deep in Brian's chest like seeds waiting to grow. He felt different, lighter, as if he had stepped into a new chapter of his life. Amina skipped past them, giggling as she carried a small jug of water, and Mama's voice called from the kitchen for breakfast. For the first time in days, Brian's heart was free, no longer weighed down by guilt. But even more than freedom, there was gratitude.
He had discovered a side of his father he never knew, a side that could laugh at mistakes and turn them into lessons of love. Sunday morning came bright and calm. The sky washed clean after days of rain. The family prepared for church, the air filled with the sound of Mama humming as she tied her headscarf, and Amina chasing her small goat around the yard. Brian helped Baba clean the compound, his hands steady and his heart full. For the first time, he felt proud just to stand beside his father. As they finished their chores, Baba slipped his repaired slippers onto his feet. They looked odd with the stitches, but he wore them with no shame. Instead, he glanced at Brian with a smile that carried both memory and meaning. Every mark on these slippers are now part of our story. They remind me of my youth, and now they remind me of yours. This is how families grow, not in perfection, but in shared mistakes and forgiveness. Brian felt a warmth rise inside him. The fear that once knotted his stomach was gone, replaced by a closeness he never expected. He realized that what had begun with panic had ended with laughter, wisdom, and love. More than the repaired slippers, it was the repaired bond that mattered most. As they walked together toward the church, Brian thought of the generations before him, his grandfather, his father, and now himself. Each had spoiled a pair of sandals, each had been forgiven, and each had learned the same lesson. Mistakes did not break families, silence and anger did. Love, however, had the power to mend everything. That morning, as the church bells rang across the village, Brian knew one truth that would never leave him. Forgiveness lasts longer than punishment, and laughter can carry more strength than anger. He smiled quietly to himself, knowing he would never forget the day the slippers were spoilt and the day love grew stronger in his